Focus on Aging Adults is sponsored in part by AARP.
Pennsylvania has one of the largest aging populations in the country. Our aging adults are vibrant, active contributors to our society. PCN, in partnership with AARP, present Focus on Aging Adults.
Welcome to Focus on Aging Adults. I'm Larry Casper. This program is brought to you in partnership between PCN and the AARP of Pennsylvania. May is Older Americans Month, and we'll be talking about funding programs that are important to seniors. Our guests are Rebecca May Cole, Executive Director of the PA Association of Area Agencies on Aging, Roy Afflerbach, Founder and President of the Afflerbach Group, and Bill Johnston-Walsh, State Director of the AARP of Pennsylvania. Welcome to our program, everyone. Bill, we're going to start with you. Forbes magazine is reporting that President Trump has cut 40% of the staff that oversees programs for seniors. What could that mean to Pennsylvania?
Thank you, Larry. Yeah, what it means for Pennsylvania is a lot of confusion. What has happened since January and all these cuts from the staff to the staff not being enough staff being there for programs means that, you know, we saw this at a couple about a month and a half ago, that they stopped payments coming down for a couple days, you know, which meant that, you know, not just individuals, but the state wasn't able to pay out to programs that have been implementing some of these. And the cuts are just across the board. You know, so it's not just HHS, but you're also getting them at agriculture. You're also getting them at transportation. You're getting them in different places that are really impacting all Pennsylvanians, but really impacting older Pennsylvanians in the programs that they rely on every day.
Rebecca, what do you think about the news emanating from Washington?
It is very confusing, I will say. The lack of certainty, knowing what it is that area agencies on aging are going to do. I mean, they're trying to plan their budgets for this upcoming fiscal year, and nobody knows what's going to happen. So, you know, having multiple different budgets to say, if this happens, then we'll do this. If that happens, we'll do that. It's very hard, and people are scared, honestly. A lot of older adults are scared, and so they're reaching out to the AAA saying, what if I lose this benefit or that benefit? So there's a lot of uncertainty, and I would say a lot of fear, not knowing.
There's a lot of confusion also at, you know, at state budget time as well. And a lot of the dollars that we receive, you know, for the programs that impact older Pennsylvanians come from the federal government, come from the Older Americans Act, come from Medicaid. And what is happening is that the state is trying to plan over the next year, and they really can't do that right now. So that puts them in disarray, and it makes, as Rebecca said, it makes people really nervous about the programs that that have been supporting them in community for forever. So,
Roy, you used to be in the legislature. What do you make of this situation?
It is worse than confusing. In all the years I've been here, this is the worst year for budget making because we're caught between, as Bill just mentioned, and as Rebecca mentioned, the total uncertainty in Washington and trying to do a state budget with a 3-month differential. Our budget, of course, ends on June 30th and starts on July 1st. The federal budget ends on September 30th and starts on October 1st. So there's always that overlap that we have to try to guess how much we're actually going to be receiving from the federal government. And when the state receives $31 billion, which is the most recent amount this past year, and now all of that is at risk because we don't know where the cuts are going to be made. We do know cuts are going to be made. More than half of that $31 billion is Medicaid money. And as everyone knows by now from the news, the House was instructed to cut $880 billion from the committee that oversees Medicaid. A good portion of that will come from Medicaid. When it's going to be phased in is another issue. So it really is a situation where people are doing more guessing than they are on terms of actual fact at this point. And then add on to that, as you started out with, Larry, the staff cuts. You know, the administration came in promising that there would be deregulation in many areas. Well, one way to deregulate quickly is to remove staff so that regulation cannot be enforced. Because to repeal a regulation takes a long time, especially at the federal level. But if you remove enough staff that they can't legitimately enforce the regulations, now you've achieved the goal that you want. You've really repealed back regulations even though they're still in force. And then you have the departments, like HHS, Health and Human Services, is just done away with the Administration for Community Living. And they're talking about splitting up the Older Americans Act and parceling it out into different areas of the federal government. So there's a lot of confusion going on, as we've said now at least 3 or 4 times.
Right. All three of you have indicated there's agreement, there's consensus that there's confusion about the news coming out of Washington. So I'm trying to interpret any kind of clues I can find out there. And I noticed when I gave that quote from Forbes magazine earlier that President Trump has cut 40% of the staff that oversees programs for seniors. At least that's not programs per se. That's the way I read it.
Wait, LIHEAP, right? The program that provides insulation for homes and so on for seniors and very poor people,
right.
That has not had the funding cut, but every staff has been removed. So you've got a program in place that's funded, but can't do anything because there are no staff there to actually do something. Yeah.
And that's important with LIHEAP. That's important when it's going to start getting colder again. We're not thinking about it right now. It's the summertime. Mm-hmm. But when it starts to get cold again, that's how people pay for their oil, pay for their heating costs. Mm-hmm. And at that point, if there's no staff to be able to send the dollars down to the states, so as Roy has said, the bottom line here is they maybe not be cutting the program per se right now, but without staff to do it,
your hands are tied and that money just sits there.
Just
exactly right.
That's
yes.
exactly
and then
right.
eventually it gets rolled back into the budget because it's not been spent. So.
Now, here's another item from Forbes magazine. They say that the staffers that oversee Meals on Wheels were fired. So let's talk about the area agencies on aging and what could that mean to services in Pennsylvania, Rebecca?
Well, again, anytime the oversight organization, staff are gone, if there are any changes or questions, you can't get the answers. So you don't know what it is that you're supposed to be doing. There are some more recent, called federal final rule, but rules that have gone into place. And there's a lot of questions about how to implement some of those rules at the state level. And there's no answer right now because the staff are not there.
It sounds like the result is really a form of paralysis.
Yes, it's a form of saving money by simply not having staff be able to complete the programs. Mm-hmm. And that's part of what their goal is, I believe, at the federal level, is to be able to, if you will, not spend this money and call that a savings, when in fact, it's not being spent because they've fired all the staff or transferred them elsewhere so that the program is, in all intent and purposes, totally out of business.
And so when people hear about staffing cuts and they hear about, that the programs are still there, but, the dollars aren't coming down, you got to put a face to that. You have to remember that there's people at the other end.
Someone has to be there to do the work.
Well, and also the people that are supposed to be receiving this, they're in their homes right now. And maybe it's just, they're in their homes because of these programs. If these programs go away, they may have to go into a facility because they won't be able to stay and age in place in their homes. Mm-hmm.
And that's particularly true with programs like Meals on Wheels. No question about that. Yeah.
And something else, for Pennsylvania, the area agencies on aging, we're fortunate because we have a lottery fund. Thank goodness we have the lottery fund. And so that means here, about 20% of the funding that area agencies on aging receive comes from the federal government. That Older Americans Act that Roy was talking about. The 80% roughly comes from the lottery fund. So we are very fortunate that we are here in Pennsylvania and have that. But at the same time, we are able to serve more people because of that and keep people in their homes. And so, if you were to take a large hit on the federal funding, a lot of the programs that we have, that we offer, we're fortunate because we're able to provide more than just Medicaid. So those people who are just barely over the line financially, that would have otherwise received Medicaid services, they would get nothing. We actually are able to serve those people. And we're the difference, I would argue, in many ways, between somebody receiving Medicaid. They're able to stay in their homes. They're functionally able to stay in their homes because they're receiving just a little bit. Maybe it's the Meals on Wheels, the home delivered meals. Maybe it's having somebody come and coordinate care for them. There are a variety of services that they receive from the AAAs that are keeping them in their homes where they want to be. And it's much more expensive when you start looking at a facility. So it ends up harming in the long run when you don't have the funding. in these places that are preventing care, like you would receive through the Medicaid program and through nursing facilities, it ends up costing more in the long run. And I think that's something that we're not necessarily thinking about.
And I think, Larry, just going back to, these are great points, Rebecca, and I think going back to the $880 billion that's being cut or looked at being cut right now in this big, beautiful bill that's happening, as they call it.
That's what the president calls it.
That's what the president calls it, and that's what Congress, Republicans in Congress are calling it. You have to remember that the impact back down to the state level. We are, as we mentioned, going through this budget process, and if they're going to be doing these cuts at that level, it means the state's going to have to pick up more of the Medicaid costs, which means where are they going to come from this? So they're going to go after some of the dollars, these lottery funds that have been there just for these programs, supplementing the Older Americans Act and some of the other programs that we've been working on. That is going to be looked at as dollars that can go over to supplement the Medicaid funds.
Or the other side of that coin is that services may actually be discontinued, because there's only two basic funds from which services for older adults are coming to Pennsylvania. The one is, as we've just been discussing, the Medicaid fund for those who are poor enough to receive Medicaid. But the only guarantee in Medicaid is to be in a nursing home. Everything else is considered a waiver, so-called home and community-based services that we talk about, which includes things like Meals on Wheels and home care and registered nurses coming in, people helping individuals take baths and cleaning their home and so on. All of those are considered waiver services that are optional. And so the state doesn't have to produce those and does not have to continue producing them if, in fact, they're now producing them to the folks who need them. So if the federal government cuts back substantially on Medicaid, the belief is that most states will do away with those optional services.
And you have to remember, when they, again, as we're talking, as they do away with the optional services, where do they need to go? They need to go out of their homes and go into a facility. Well, 64% of individuals right now in nursing homes across Pennsylvania rely on Medicaid dollars. So what's going to happen with that when you start building those numbers up? It's it's a cycle, and it's just a no-win situation.
Before we continue our conversation about potential federal funding cuts, let's go back to what Rebecca brought up a couple minutes ago, the lottery fund. In other words, I think there's some people out there that need to know more about just how the lottery fund does help these programs. We have a prescription drug program within the lottery. Tell us about that.
The PACE program is one that we have, provides prescription assistance to individuals age 60 and over. There's also the PACE Net program, and which one you qualify for depends on your level of income. But again, these programs that are provided through the Department of Aging here in Pennsylvania are for the people who they did the right thing in that they saved their money, they planned for retirement, they have just a little bit more as far as, assets maybe, and because of that, we're able to still serve them. And the lottery, Roy was actually around when the lottery started. Thank you, Roy,
Yeah, you're very
for being
welcome.
involved.
Thank you very much, Roy. We appreciate it.
I am aging in place.
Yes, you are. But Pennsylvania had the foresight to create the lottery, and the intent of the lottery. Not only is there the PACE program, there's always also the home property tax and rent rebate that older adults are eligible for.
Transportation.
Transportation is also part of it, and the intent behind the lottery was to be able to keep people in their homes. It was for those. Well, I'll let.
Yep. No, go ahead. You're doing well. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's services, outside of medical assistance or Medicaid, and that's really the focus, is to keep people in their homes. And again, we're so fortunate that we have that.
Well, thanks for telling us about that, Rebecca. I make it a point on this program to explore the lottery. Whenever it comes up, there are people out there that need to know about those benefits that, in fact, they could take advantage of. Now, could federal cuts, potential federal cuts, I'll call them, affect transportation for seniors? What have you seen so far?
Well, they really will affect, because there is money coming in from the federal government. Part of that $31 billion I mentioned that we received from the federal government, part of that has transportation money in it. I don't recall off the top of my head how much it is, but clearly if that were cut back, again, it would fall upon the state or the municipalities. And as you know, right now, Pennsylvania is in the legislature having a very significant discussion about how do we further fund mass transit, or how do we further fund that type of transit which is necessary to be able to send out to pick up an individual, to get them to the doctor appointment or whatever it may be, which is part of what the lottery does in Pennsylvania. And depending upon how much the federal government cuts, that just exacerbates our problem. We've got that situation right now where we can't seem to be able to find a way to solve it. And by the way, mass transportation in the major cities is not all that it's cracked up to be for this, because if an older individual has to get onto a bus and maybe change 2 or 3 times before they can get to where they're going, that can get extremely confusing. So it's not just the cities that have this problem, it's also the rural areas. But yeah, the bottom line to your question is cuts in federal transportation money will absolutely affect Pennsylvania and absolutely affect older adults here.
Well, my understanding of other potential cuts could affect elder abuse prevention. So the word prevention, let's focus on that. In other words, that implies that there are programs out there that can prevent it. Can anybody explain those to me?
I can certainly
Please.
start. Frankly, everything that the AAAs do, that the area agencies on aging do, can be seen as prevention of abuse, neglect.
Give me some examples.
Well, one example, if you're talking about neglect, let's say that there's a caregiver who is working hard. Maybe they are also working, or maybe they have needs themselves. If nobody is there supporting that caregiver, maybe they're unable to take care of their loved one who also lives with them. You have a lot of couples, who one may be less able because of various functional issues than another. The other, it doesn't mean that they necessarily have the ability to provide everything that somebody would need. An area agency on aging, when they come in, maybe they're coming in to see the person who's the least, able to take care of for themselves. Maybe the AAA comes in and sees them and asks them questions, but they're also looking around at what's happening in in the person's house. Does it look like things are kept up? Does it look like they have enough food? Does it look like, the person's being bathed adequately? Sometimes when it comes to some things like neglect, it's not something that's intentional. It's something that can happen, and if we're not able to support that caregiver, that can definitely happen. And another piece of it is also self-neglect is a large portion of what area agencies on aging are seeing when they're going out and doing those protective services investigations, and that's also because somebody doesn't have access to services.
Someone has to initiate that visit, Rebecca. That's what I'm thinking about right now, in both of these examples you're talking about.
Yes. Well, sometimes there's something that's called a report of need. It's when somebody calls and says, I think I saw something happening to Mrs. Jones. She lives here, and somebody will come out and do an investigation. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely. It could be a neighbor. It could be somebody at the library. It could be, the mail carrier.
Because the caregiver might think we're doing fine here, but then they find out otherwise after you visit.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And then sometimes it's just, a child saying, my mom and dad live on their own. I think they may need help, but I'm not sure what they have, what they need. The AAAs are those local resources. We have 67 counties. We have 52 area agencies on aging. So they're very local. They're very familiar with what's happening in their local communities, which is one of the benefits of having the number of AAAs that we have. And all 67 counties are served by a AAA. So the entire Commonwealth is covered. But if you call and say, I need some help, I'm not really sure, or my mom, my dad, needs help, the AAA will go out and will meet with them, and that's when they're looking. From the moment they walk in that door, does it look like they have the food they need? Does it look like they've been able to receive, bathing adequately? Even something as simple as having extension cords, across the floor, those can be trip hazards.
That's a trip hazard.
Yeah. And then somebody trips and they fall and they break a hip. They end up in the hospital. They
can't
go home.
That cascades into expensive problems.
Exactly.
And I think the other key thing too is we're really lucky in Pennsylvania to have the area agency on aging network. People forget that they're there. They're the single point of entry for all of these things. So as Rebecca was saying, they'll get a report of need. They'll go in. And then they can now say, okay, you need X, Y, and Z. They can come back, and they have the programs, they have the staff that are able to point them in the right direction of saying, you need a meal once a week. We'll get Meals on Wheels for you. You need someone to come in here once a week or a couple times a week for bathing or for helping with preparing a meal. To keep them in their homes as long as possible, which is great for them. It's what they want. It's what their families want. It's also good for the taxpayers because it's keeping people at a lower cost in their community instead of going into a more costly facility.
And full disclosure, I must say that I represent the AAAs, and I represent P4A, all right? So everything I have to say, I believe in, but everyone should know that I also represent them. But you asked for an example of how things can go awry, and people don't even know that they're involved in it in that way. We had a case in Pennsylvania not too long ago where an individual, his mother or his wife, I don't remember which it was now, was a wanderer. And he was concerned about her being injured and wandering out into the street or falling down the stairs and so on while he was at work. So in the morning, he would take her down into the basement where he had things set up with a bathroom available and so on, and he would tether her so that she could not leave the basement or get hurt trying to go up the stairs. So basically, when we found out about it, when the AAA found out about it, went out and did the investigation, they explained to him that he couldn't do that. And he thought he was doing the best thing possible because he was keeping this woman safe from wandering out of the house or falling down the stairs and injuring herself and not being able to call anybody for help. So, but they explained to him, of course, you can't chain your mother or whoever it was to a post in the basement, even if you have everything set up for heat and cool and bathroom and food and everything else. So, but he thought he was doing the best thing he could possibly do to keep her safe.
Very interesting example, Roy.
Yes.
If I can also jump in and talk about something that is increasing in number dramatically, and that is financial exploitation. And another way that there can be kind of an early warning system by having the area agencies on aging interacting with older adults. Maybe an older adult will say, oh, I was just talking to my friend and their daughter is investing in this fantastic, thing, and so I'm going to put $20,000 toward.
Assured me of a big return.
Exactly. And sometimes it's even a small amount. Getting phone calls and saying, I have your grandson or your nephew, and send us gift cards to be able to pay off, some kind of debt maybe that they've incurred, those kinds of things. And having those conversations, this is where the social aspect is so important. Having those conversations, going to places like senior centers, they talk with each other, and then you realize that doesn't sound right, actually. Maybe you want to, check into that, or maybe you want to take a step back and not be sending large amounts of money to places overseas, or getting the gift cards, or all of those kinds of things.
And education is key on that. At AARP, we basically have a consumer issues task force, and we have about 20 volunteers that go across the state that really do education. And we've been working with the FBI locally and around.
What do they do, Bill? Do they go to senior centers and give lectures?
They go across. Whoever will listen to them, they'll go and they'll give their spiel about how important it is. If you're on that phone, ask the questions or hang up. Things like
just not engaging at all can save you a lot of money and trouble.
And now with with technology, they're getting these texts that are basically saying that they owe money to the turnpike because of the toll issue, which they just have to know, because you get that, you're worried, so people are just paying, and this money is going off, and to these crooks. So it's constant, and as Rebecca said, it's just growing and growing, and we're talking billions of dollars around the country now of people being defrauded out of their hard-earned dollars.
Well, speaking of dollars, let's talk about Social Security benefits. President Trump says he will not reduce Social Security benefits on his watch. However, some argue that the system could run out of money anyway. Who can expand on that?
Well, it's very unlikely.
People are living longer, Roy. I know that's part of it.
Exactly right, yes. But it's very unlikely that the government would renege on a social contract as important as Social Security. No doubt in my mind about the fact that they will do everything possible to keep that system operating. Now, does that mean that they won't reduce benefits? No, because again, there are sneaky ways you can do that. One is just let inflation take over. All right, inflation takes over. You don't provide a cost of living increase that's substantial on a year by year basis. You raise the rate of retirement from whatever it is now, 70 to 74, 75, whatever it is. So you decrease the number of people coming into the system. At the same time, people on the other end are dying, going out of the system. So there are ways to cut Social Security, quote unquote, and still not cut it.
Adjust the system, but maintain it.
Exactly.
I think the other piece is going back to the staffing issue with Social Security. They cut staff as as well with the Social Security Administration. At AARP, what we did is our members were up in arms. We have 1.8 million members here. We have 38 million members across the country, and they were just like, "What is going on here? We need to be able to access this program. We need to ask these questions. Hey, I'm just applying for it now." We had stories of people that would have to wait 5 hours on the phone to try to get through, and then they were disconnected after the fifth hour. It was just horrendous. So we've been working on that. We had 2 million individuals call and send emails into their members of Congress to say this is unacceptable, and to go into the administration. We were able for the administration to backpedal a little bit on this, to be able to say we're not going to close offices down. We're not. We're going to keep the phone lines open. We're going to get additional staff to be able to help that. And that just happened. Again, it's getting people that are being impacted by this.
There's strength in numbers.
There are strength in numbers, and that's what AARP has with our numbers of our members.
And I think it's important to remember that Social Security is an insurance program. It's not just some welfare entitlement that was created some time ago. It's an insurance program that both employers and employees have paid into as paying the premiums for that program. So it's no different than any other life insurance program.
You could call it your old age pension.
Indeed.
You could. We don't like to call it old age pension, but it's something that people have paid into.
You know how terms go in and out of style.
That's exactly right. They paid into it their whole life, and it's theirs, and they should have it.
Well, just to get some further context on the importance of Social Security, how much do seniors rely on their Social Security benefits? My understanding is it's supposed to replace about 1/3 of your income when you were working. Rebecca, you reacted to that. Go ahead.
No, I don't know exactly what the percentage is in fact, but to
something
think that
bothered
it's
you.
1/3 of your income. Number one, 1/3 of your income is a significant decrease. And then on top of it, if you look at what some of these folks are actually getting, and unfortunately I don't have that information right off the top of my at my fingertips. But,
sure.
There is no way that you can live off of the low amount that Social Security is providing. It's just not possible.
And I can tell you in Pennsylvania, it's 40-some%. I don't have that exact number of individuals that are fully retired that live off just their Social Security benefit. That's 40%. We're talking, probably 1 million individuals or close to 1 million individuals that are just living off. And as Rebecca said, that's not enough money, and so they rely on these other programs that we're fighting for here at both the state and federal level to be able to live independently. So 40-some% of individuals living just off their Social Security is unacceptable.
While the governor and legislators are thinking about the budget that is due at the end of June, by the way, the Family Care Act has to do with paid leave. Explain what the idea is there, and is that in the budget proposal from the governor? Do we know offhand?
Offhand, I believe it is, but I couldn't tell you to what amount.
Yeah. Anyway, Roy, tell me what the basic idea is anyway, and what it's supposed to provide.
Well, we started trying to convince employers some years ago that this was a good idea for them to embrace as well, and call it family care, not just simply child care leave, because it helps to keep the employer focused upon what they need to do, and it helps to keep the employee focused upon what they need to do, and the employee can then come back. Or maybe it's a part-time type of a leave, so that's 4 hours a day the employee's on instead of 8. And the whole idea behind it was to be able to keep that well-skilled, well-trained employee, and at the same time be able to recognize that there are family needs, at least for a certain period of time, whatever that may be, that this person has to give to the family or leave the job altogether. That just wasn't good for employers. And we're still trying to convince a lot of employers and a lot of legislators of that possibility as well, that this is really a good thing for economic development and for maintaining the economy within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Now, whether or not they'll actually pass the whole thing and pass it at a rate that's reasonable, that's what the debate is all about.
And speaking of debating, we know that so-called skill games are being debated in Harrisburg, and there's a lot of give and take there. Skill games are those things that look like slot machines. You can find them in mini markets, pizza parlors, social clubs. Governor wants to regulate them and tax them. Do seniors stand to gain anything here?
they stand to lose a lot and continue to lose a lot. Skill games have been cutting into the proceeds that lottery has been giving. And so that's a major place where we have concerns.
Some places have both, don't they?
Oh yeah, they do. And they're unregulated, which means there's no one who's making sure that what they're paying to, whether it's the social club or the mini mart, is actually getting the amount that they're supposed to. There's no one actually making sure that the person playing is getting the amount that they're supposed to. It may seem like you're making all kinds of money, but you don't know behind the scenes, what it is that's happening. And so regulating them would be, at least give a little bit of reassurance. They're not talking about getting rid of them entirely, but regulating them, treating them similar to some of the casinos and that kind of thing. Then it also,
the governor's favoring 52% tax rate, which is comparable to slots.
Yes. And we believe that a significant portion of the funding that the state would receive should go into the lottery to be able to kind of recoup some of the funds that have been taken away, have been lost because of the skill games that are happening.
And there's still a major question about whether the actual games out there are legal or not legal. With just in the past few days, there was a raid established by Pennsylvania's Attorney General Sunday, and the state police cooperated and seized over 1,000 machines out in several counties in western Pennsylvania. Now, it just happens that the companies that were placing those machines, one of the principals has been convicted in the past of felony counts of illegal gambling and all that sort of thing. So that may come to play in whether or not this seizure can actually stand up. But as Rebecca indicated, without any present regulation and any present licensing, it has been a serious question for a number of years now as to whether or not the state can actually do anything until the legislature acts. And that's why we're pressing for the last at least 7 to 10 years to get the legislature to act and either declare these games totally illegal, or if they're going to legalize them, regulate them, tax them appropriately, and as Rebecca indicated, provide funding from some of that taxation back into the lottery, because clearly they'll be competing directly with the lottery as they have been.
And I think at this point, as we're talking about cuts at the federal level, cuts at the state level, it's important to be able to have another revenue source that's coming in for older Pennsylvanians. And I know we'll probably talk about this later, but the area agencies on aging have been doing stellar work with less dollars and being flat funded for years now. And there's a need to be able to get more additional dollars out into the AAA network for that programs to continue in the great work that they're doing.
And if I can jump on
Please
that,
do.
Please, I would love to be able to try to explain this. If you think about the cost, it just going to McDonald's. I have 2 children, so 4 of us go to McDonald's. You used to be able to, I don't know, even spend $20 and be able to get lunch.
But now?
It's now $40, $50 plus just to go to McDonald's. The cost to get a dozen eggs, the cost to get your bread. All of those things have gone up significantly. Even, we could go back a long ways, and I don't think anybody would ever say that the area agencies on aging were fully funded. However, we decided, let's just take a snapshot. Let's say 2019. It was the last year before COVID hit, and the amount of funding that the area agencies on aging received. When you have inflation, flat funding with inflation effectively is a cut. There have been small, increases along the way. This current governor has actually provided some increased dollars. But if you just look at inflation and the number of older adults that's been increasing dramatically, we're almost at the point where we will have 1 in 3 people in Pennsylvania will be an older adult by 2030. So that dramatic increase, inflation, number of older adults, in order to just serve people like they did in 2019, we need another $105 million a year.
2030 is right around the corner.
Yep.
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Yep. So just to keep us at the level we were 5-6 years ago, that's a significant
So
increase.
that's why this year we're very grateful that the governor did put in his proposal to the legislature a $20 million increase. Again, as Rebecca said, that's not close to the 105, but it's a start, and we thank the governor for that. We're just now working with AARP, P4A, Roy and other lobbyists really looking at to make sure that at least that gets started. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's been flat funded for quite a few budgets now. And the AAAs are working and doing the best that they can without stopping. They're trying not to have waiting lists. They're trying not to stop programs. But if they go for another year of a flat funding or no funding at all, it's just they can't keep this up. And as Rebecca mentioned, 1 in 3 individuals just within the next 5 years will be over the age of 65. We'll have more people in Pennsylvania over the age of 65 than we will have under the age of 18 in the next 5 years. And we need those dollars to be able to keep these programs and be able to support that population.
We actually asked our AAAs what will happen if you don't get additional funding, if we have flat funding. They estimate at least 40 senior centers across the state will be closed. They estimate more than 100 programs across the state will be closed. It's just completely ended. That's not to include decreases in levels of service for folks.
Let me return to skill games just for a minute. And a question for you, Roy. As I indicated, the governor is supporting a 52% tax rate. And so we're talking about this because there's potential revenue out there for somebody. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, Senator Gene Yaw is proposing a tax rate of 16%. Now, given your experience in the legislature, and you know about tactics within the legislature, does this somehow ignite the debate that somehow a number will be found in the middle that will satisfy everyone?
Well, I don't know if it'll satisfy everyone, but absolutely a number will be found in the middle. Neither 16% nor 52% is likely to pass. And there's very valid reasons for that as well. The casinos, of course, are contributing a lot of money, and they're contributing a lot of money to older adults as well. And in fact, the governor's budget this year proposes to move funding of the entire property tax and rent rebate program over to the fund from which the casinos contribute money every year. So they're looking at it and saying, look, 52%, we want them to have that 52%, the same as we're paying. But the casinos have a way of offsetting because they have more than slot machines. All right, so they can offset that 52% with other games that they have and so on. Meanwhile, on the other end of the spectrum, with Senator Yaw's bill at 16%, the casinos have a really legitimate argument there that 16%, and these folks are now going to be competing directly with what amounts to slot machines, as we've said, just simply isn't enough. Let's get a more realistic number in there. And the truth of the matter is that the manufacturers located in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, are quite willing to go at a higher rate than that. But naturally, for negotiation purposes, everyone's starting low and everyone's starting high. Somewhere in between there, if this thing passes this year, and it probably has the best chance of passage this year that it's had in the last decade, we'll see what the number is.
Let's talk about another item within the governor's budget proposal. It has to do with a program called the Whole Home Repair Program. So the idea is to help Pennsylvanians do major repairs on their house. And I can certainly see that this would be a benefit to seniors. And what's the temperature within the legislature now for this program?
Why is there a keep looking, Roy?
Bill handed the baton to you, Roy.
Right to you, Roy.
The temperature is good because the $50 million program that was approved in the last budget, that money went out so fast and there was so much need left over for legitimate programs that the supporters came back, and I think they asked for $100 million this year in the current budget. I believe they doubled it.
Because the first program was during COVID, wasn't it? And maybe that had to do with overwhelming the money that was available?
It wasn't actually during COVID itself, but it was right thereafter that the whole thing began. And that had everything to do with overwhelming the money. And where we're at right now is the legislature, because, again, of the fear of what's going to happen from the federal level and how much money we're likely to lose there, they're reluctant to expand any program in Pennsylvania right now. What does that mean for the folks locally? Well, it rolls downhill. If you're not going to fund it at the federal level, you're not going to fund it at the state level, it falls down to the county level or the municipal level, beyond the counties, and you either fund it or the program goes away. So I can't predict what's going to happen with this one. The results of it have been excellent, but whether or not they'll expand it and continue, again, that's all part of the budget debate right now.
And again, as we talked about it, I think that the area agencies on aging have always had a program that would be able to put changes into a home, so that people could stay in their homes as long as possible. So they would either fix up a bathroom, to put guardrail.
Modifications for mobility
Modifications,
challenges.
yes, so that they're able to stay in. What at AARP, what we've been doing is that we've been seeing, we'd love, AARP's in support of trying to get these dollars on the home repair program. But we've been working at the local level with mayors, with city councils, with county councils to be able to say that we need more affordable housing stock in this state, and we need to be able to do that. So we've been working with them on a whole host of different ways across in Philadelphia, in the Lehigh Valley, Pittsburgh, Lancaster, here in the center part of the state, to really be able to start looking at that, knowing that this housing is needed, and these repairs to current homes are also going to be needed for people to stay in their homes as long as possible.
One of the other things, and I'm going to kick this over to Rebecca here in a second because I know she's familiar with this, the AAAs have been helping in different counties to provide small housing units on the property next to the home that the children may live in or what have you, and mother and dad can move in there. And they need obviously to work with the local governments because a lot of the issue there is a zoning issue. Can we do it? And if you have a local government that's cooperative, they've been able to do it and do it successfully. And then, of course, the modular home that they put in place, the small home, the tiny home as they're being called these days.
Right.
Once it's no longer needed there, it can be probably rehabbed and certainly moved to another location. Did I pretty much encapsulate that, Rebecca?
You absolutely did, yes. Yes, they call the program Echo Cottages. Don't ask me what that stands for, unfortunately, but it is Echo Cottages, and they're able to move them to another home. And one of the biggest obstacles has been those zoning issues.
Yes.
So
That's the thing that comes to mind immediately. You just
Right.
can't put up a place to live wherever you want. You have to talk to someone about that.
Exactly. And you have to make sure that you can connect into the water and sewer situation as well, because you don't want grandma or grandpa trying to come across the yard in the
Completely.
wintertime. Yeah.
Right.
I did outhouses as a kid. I don't want to do that again.
As far as transportation is concerned, which we talked about in some detail earlier, what's a good mindset for adapting to suddenly not being able to drive? That's upsetting news. And what's a good frame of mind to adopt? Who would care to? That's kind of the think piece for today's show.
it is a think piece. I think it is definitely a difficult part of life that you come to. That's where knowing that we can rely on public transportation and shared ride and all of those programs is so important.
Right.
And so connecting, in some ways, I think knowing that you can rely on or reach out to your area agency on aging to see what might be available to help you getting to your doctor's appointments or to the grocery store, those kinds of things. The thing that I will say, though, and that is, there are some things that we lose as we get older. The important thing, though, is to not focus just on what we're losing. It's focusing on kind of the whole picture of aging and not just things like, I can no longer drive or I'm not working anymore. I could probably talk about this for hours, but making sure that when you're thinking about older adults, you're not thinking about the frail, elderly, vulnerable older people. You think about all of the value that they provide to our communities. You think about, something that happens, when looking at employers and when they're looking to hire new staff. A lot of times people think, I want to hire younger people because they'll be there longer, we'll be able to train them in the way that we want them to be. When actually, I think it's something around the average employment time for younger adults is around 2 years at any given place. The average amount of time an older adult actually spends in a job is 9 years. So if you're actually looking to bring someone in, it's some of those things we need to look at a little bit differently and not focusing on the negatives, but focusing on the positives that come along with aging.
And I think just going back to transportation just for a second, yes, we rely on the shared ride program, and it is a hard conversation to have with a family member to say that maybe you shouldn't be driving anymore. But some of the things that we should be thinking about are other models. We should be thinking about like Uber or Lyft. and that's out there now that can come right to, as long as the person can get outside and get into a vehicle, that is something to do there. There's also volunteers. There's such programs as villages programs that are happening around the country, and several here in Pennsylvania where a group of neighborhoods or areas like Levittown in Bucks County or Rittenhouse Square in Philadelphia, where a group of people pay into just a pot of dollars, and they help them with getting a handyman, or hey, I need a ride to my doctor's office. There's those types of things. So we need to just start thinking in a more positive way, as Rebecca is saying, is that there's technology now, there's different ways of doing this, and getting people out and about is still key for us.
Yeah, the most critical element is planning ahead early enough. Unless someone has a stroke, for example, you don't just suddenly not be able to drive or suddenly lose something along this line. But people, they just don't
just put it off.
They just keep putting it off. Sure, it's human nature, just keep putting it off. But that ability to plan ahead and to have family members open the conversation, and as you've indicated, it's sometimes a difficult conversation, but it's necessary. I had to talk my father out of being able to drive.
When it was time for my mom to stop driving, I said to her, well, you've had 60 years behind the wheel. That's a pretty good run.
Yes.
That's the way I look at it.
And you're still alive.
Exactly, right. Success. You're still alive.
Something Roy just said, too, about planning ahead, I think that's important. A lot of times we find that people are calling the Area Agency on Aging when they're in crisis. Mom's coming home, she fell, I don't know what to do. Thinking ahead and reaching out and saying, maybe my Area Agency on Aging knows of a program, maybe they don't provide it themselves, but they know in the community. Reach out to them now before you're at the point where you're in a crisis. Find out what's available to you, and then you can plan, and so you're not waiting until you're in that crisis kind of situation. So that planning is really important.
Yeah, and for those who are watching and listening to the program, you don't have to, we don't have yellow pages anymore, unfortunately, but you don't have to go online necessarily to find out about an area agency on aging. Go to your legislator's office. They all know where the area agency on aging are. They work with us continuously. So it's easy to find out from a number of different sources how to get in contact.
Your lawmaker can connect you with a whole bunch of resources you never knew existed.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's talk about the governor's plan that he signed back in 2023, and they called it Aging Our Way. And it had to do with long-term solutions. And the governor ordered this plan to be developed by the Department of Aging, and they're calling it at least they were calling it a 10-year roadmap. Well, here we are 2 years into this plan. What accomplishments or achievements are out there that show that we're making progress with what the governor wanted to do?
Well, actually, I was fortunate on Monday. I was able to see a preview of what they call the Caregiver Toolkit. And of course, I'm not going to remember the official name of it, but we were able to see a preview of what it will look like. It is amazing.
Really? I remember hearing about the toolkit.
Oh, my
so what's
goodness.
in it?
So you would be able, there's a lot of different ways that you can use it, but you can go in, you can actually fill out a little questionnaire that says, are you in the sandwich generation, you're caring for a parent and you're caring for a child? What kinds of needs does the person maybe need? Transportation. There's information about caregiving and supporting the caregiver. There's information on a variety of programs that exist currently. It's very tailored. It's based online, but it's very tailored to what it is that you need. So
a program that can make you a good caretaker.
Yes.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Because people don't know. I mean, there are obvious needs, of course, but there's a whole bunch of things you can benefit from other people's experience.
Oh, yeah. Most of us just stumbled into it because it happened.
Right. It just happened.
Yeah. I think it's called PA Care. I believe, Rebecca, I think that'll be the name for it, PA Care. Yes.
Yeah. And I think one of the other pieces, we're very excited about the caregiving toolkit, or PA Cares. One of the other things that I think are short-term wins are the age-friendly designations, around the state. As I mentioned earlier, it's really cities, counties, and the governor's looking at making Pennsylvania an age-friendly state, which is part of one of the recommendations in the plan. And I think what we're seeing with these age-friendly designations around the state is really pulling in elected officials, pulling in nonprofits in each of these areas, so they can start looking at housing issues, start looking at transportation, open spaces, caregiving issues, things that are going to be impacting, making cities or townships age-friendly for all ages, so that people are looking at sidewalks, looking at the time it takes to cross a busy street, curb cuts, all of these things. And as Roy had mentioned earlier, I think this is the piece with the Aging Our Way PA that's incorporating not just state input, but also local input, because it's the zoning that really is going to be key on being able to do some of these eco housing and some of these other pieces of curb cuts or light changes that start off at the local level. So I think the Aging Our Way PA over the last 2 years has really hit the ground running, and I'm really looking forward to seeing. I know there's some dollars. I don't know the exact number offhand that's in the budget to be able to implement some of the other recommendations as we move forward in this year's 2025 budget.
$5,900,000 this year.
$5,900,000.
And some odd change.
See, that's why Rebecca and I always bring Roy along. he has the numbers.
The numbers at his fingertips.
But one of the, if I may just say,
Please.
The beauty, we don't know what's really going to actually turn out through this 10-year plan, but the beauty of constructing it was that it came not just grassroots, as I like to say, but actually grass seed, by going out all around Pennsylvania, and Rebecca's AAAs hosted many of the meetings that citizens came into.
20,000, right?
Yes, and 8,000 comments that were recorded and so on. So everything that is in there was designed around what people said they needed as to where they are living in their communities and how they're living in their communities. And that was the real basis of it. Very few government programs have gone through that kind of a construction, if you will.
To ask that simple question, what do you need?
Yes.
And it wasn't in a silo either at the state level, because the governor, it was really run by the Department of Aging, Secretary Kavulich and his team, but they included every single, so it would, it was Health and Human Services, it was insurance, you name it. It was even the Department of Environmental Protection. All of these different pieces, parks and recs. People were coming in and talking about making sure that across the board they were making things age friendly and appropriate, and making recommendations for that as we move forward. And they're all working on these things right now. So it's not working in a silo. It's really bringing people together and organizations together.
As far as basic needs are concerned, let's talk about food, nutrition here in Pennsylvania, and food programs like SNAP. So I'm kind of going full circle to potential cuts from the federal government, and what could that mean to SNAP or any food program here in Pennsylvania? We talked about Meals on Wheels.
Yes. Well, again, SNAP is one of the programs that has been leveled for cutting and ending at the federal government. They just feel, for whatever reason, that the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program is no longer necessary. And the truth of the matter is, Larry, that many of the people who receive SNAP benefits don't know what they're actually receiving, because years ago, not that many years ago, everybody got excited about being politically correct in what we called things, all right? So we could no longer call it a welfare card or a Medicaid card or anything like that.
Food stamps.
See, Bill didn't like old age pension when I said that before.
Right. Food stamps.
And that's what SNAP is. It was the food stamp program under a different name.
Yep.
It's still the food stamp program under a different name.
Right.
But people who are getting it don't realize they're getting food stamps, because they're calling it SNAP. So to try to even get people to contact their congressmen and so forth to protest this, what's SNAP?
Right.
I have this card. I don't know what that is.
You have to adopt the nomenclature, and government keeps changing it.
Yeah. Exactly right. Yes. Yeah. Just as we changed a lot of things so that we, wouldn't have people feeling that they were somehow inferior, perhaps. And that was the whole. And the intent behind it was great. But here's where it's led: that people are now receiving these government services, and they don't know exactly what those services are because of the name of it.
And here's an example of another program that will be cut. That's going to be putting more pressure on the area agencies on aging, because people will all of a sudden not be getting their SNAP cards anymore, being able to go to the grocery store. So it means they're not going to be eating, and then they will be coming to the AAA, the Area Agency on Aging, to say, I need this. So it means more for Meals on Wheels, for senior centers that have congregate meal sites. It would be putting more pressure on them to be able to serve more people
And
with
the food
less
banks.
dollars. Yes.
And the food banks.
And
the food banks are getting pressed as well. Interestingly enough, that whole program of food stamps was started in great part by a congresswoman from New York City who found a way to be able to provide food to poor people and at the same time subsidize the agricultural industry in the United States. That's how they got the votes together to put it into place. So if SNAP is discontinued...
How far does that program go back, Roy? I ask because I have a hunch you know.
That must go back into the mid-'60s, maybe the late '60s.
60
but somewhere
years
in
or so?
there. Yes, yeah. Yep, and the right now what's happening with that cut is that the farmers are now beginning to realize that they're on the bottom end of that as well, because if SNAP is going to go out of business, so are the subsidies that they've been receiving to provide food to the program. So all this kind of thing trickles down and circulates in a different way.
Yeah.
At the beginning
Shirley Chisholm, by the way, was the congresswoman that came up with that.
Shirley Chisholm,
Yes.
I can see her in my mind. At the beginning of our show, I indicated it's Older Americans Month. That's the month of May. So that sounds like it's an awareness campaign, Bill. So in that case, what's the message coming from AARP this month?
To us, basically, Older Americans Month is a month where we celebrate aging. We celebrate it in a positive way, as Rebecca has been saying. We also want to celebrate it to remind people that people need support as well, whether it be Social Security, whether it be Medicare, Medicaid, whether it be the AAAs, the Area Agencies on Aging, that need the support that they need in the budgets being passed to be able to have the programs and the staff to be able to help people across this Commonwealth. So that's what we want to do. We want to be positive. We want to remind people that there's a large segment, 1 in 3 in 5 years, in
by 2030.
Yep, that will be over the age of 65. That may or may not need the supports, but that we want to make sure that these dollars in this positive influx is there for all of them.
And there's a tremendous amount of talent among these folks as well. Regardless of how old they may or may not be, there's a tremendous amount of talent there. I would recommend for those of you who have not seen it to watch the film Nona's. Nona's is a perfect example of how an individual got the bright idea of asking grandmothers to be able to come in and be the chefs in a restaurant he was starting and cook the type of food that their families had cooked forever and ever. All right, great film to watch about how valuable older adults can be.
One more question that has to do with Older Americans Month, because when I think of that name, there's the Older Americans Act. And that was signed into law in 1965. I understand that was landmark legislation. We probably can't do it justice in just a couple minutes, but what are some of the important protections that came out of that in 1965? How has it been updated since?
Well, that's the legislation that enacted the Area Agencies on Aging originally and created them. Each state was able to kind of configure their AAAs however they saw fit. But everything that's grown from Area Agencies on Aging since that point really has come back to the Older Americans Act. And that's also the funding kind of vehicle, maybe is how to say it, at the federal level. It's through the Older Americans Act as well. All of the protective services, all of the preventing elder abuse, neglect, all of that, those meals, those in-home services, all of those things can tie themselves back to the Older Americans Act.
Which was created in great part in order to provide congregate meals. Because during the 1960 campaign for president, there was a lot of information that was becoming known about many of the states, and including right next door in West Virginia and also in Appalachia section of Pennsylvania, of people just not having sufficient nourishment. So the idea of at least one nourishing meal a day at a congregate setting would take care of providing them that nourishment and also the socialization that they needed. But the Act's in danger today. It's in danger because Congress has not renewed it. It's essentially out of business, except the way things work in Congress. As long as they keep funding it, people can keep using the services. So they can continue to fund it through the continuing resolutions and so on that they passed. But it has to be renewed. That's number one. Number two, the Trump administration has decided to do away with the Administration for Community Living and to take the Older Americans Act and divide it and put pieces of it into the Administration for Children and Families and part of it into CMS. For Medicare and Medicaid services. So that's the worst thing that can happen, splitting it up and splitting up the smoothness of it.
Our guests have been Rebecca May Cole, Executive Director from the PA Association of Area Agencies on Aging, Roy Afflerbach, founder and president of the Afflerbach Group, and Bill Johnston-Walsh, State Director of the AARP of Pennsylvania. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
That's it for Focusing on Aging Adults. I'm Larry Casper. Thanks for watching.
Focus on Aging Adults is sponsored in part by AARP.